Our coalition is on the offensive. ISIL is on the defensive, and ISIL is going to lose.
It is right and appropriate for us to be vigilant and aggressive in trying to deal with that. The same way that a big city mayor's got to cut the crime rate down if he wants that city to thrive.
President Obama asking Congress to authorize military force in the fight against ISIS, but sending mixed messages about the urgency of the war on terror. And we're back now with the panel. Well, we've already apparently made some news today with our exclusive interview with John Boehner. We just got a statement from a spokesman for Nancy Pelosi, the House Democratic leader. She says this: the Speaker's reliance on talking points and finger-pointing was a sad reflection of the fact that Tea Party continues, I think it probably should be that, the Tea Party, but they were in a rush, continues to hold the gavel as they insist on their futile anti-immigrant grandstanding. So much for reaching an accommodation on the budget for the Department of Homeland Security. George, back to the war authorization. As our resident scholar on language, I'd like you to help me with this, because the request the president sent Congress says this, and I want to put the quote, does not authorize the use of the United States Armed Forces in enduring offensive ground combat operations. Enduring offensive ground combat operations. How is a commander in the field supposed to parse that?
Well, this reflects the basic problem, which is that the constitutional authors of the War Powers provisions did not anticipate this nation at war against non-state actors. What we're debating here, Chris, is authorizing something we've been doing for 6 months. 2,000 strikes have already been made. Now, no one wants any president to be empowered to wage war against anyone at any time for any length of time using any measures he wants. So they want to somehow circumscribe him. The Article 2 caucus, we can call them, mostly conservatives, think that this is too restrictive precisely because of the language you've cited. Enduring offensive, what's it mean? There are others of us think that this is entirely too permissive because of other language. It says it can be used against Islamic State or associated forces. How many forces in Libya and Egypt would that cover? Is Boko Haram apt to be declared part of this? If so, then we're authorizing the president to intervene in sub-Saharan Africa, in Nigeria, and contiguous states. Too permissive would be my judgment.
Juan, you heard, well, that's one argument, that it's too permissive. On the other hand, you heard Speaker Boehner in the first segment, he said it's too restrictive, that it doesn't, this authorization, by saying that there can't be enduring offensive ground operations, that it doesn't give President Obama the tools that he needs to beat ISIS.
Well, I think that if he's asking for a strategy to be laid out and given to him, or if he wants to articulate a strategy, I think he thinks he's the general or he's the commander-in-chief, and he's neither. So I think it's not the job of the Congress to run a war. It's the job of the Congress to say, yes, we approve it and we will fund it or not. And as we know, and the fact is the Congress hasn't approved a war in more than 50 years, and the last time they did a resolution of this type was 13 years ago in a wholly different circumstance against al-Qaeda. So I think what we're dealing with here is a situation where they wouldn't even have a vote or a conversation if the president hadn't sent the language. Now that he has, I think they are locked in a box. Speaker Boehner said to you this morning, we're going to have lengthy debate on this. Where's the sense of urgency? I thought everybody was actually absolutely hawkish that the president needed to be doing more. In fact, what they're saying now is...
It's not like passing this authorization is going to change. I mean, the war has been going on for 6 months.
That's what I say. And
so
George
why is there no urgency in passing the authorization?
No, it's because you know what? The way that our government works, the Congress should put their fingerprints on it. But right now, they're afraid that they're going to have to go to voters at some point and be held responsible for authorizing this president's actions.
Dana, how do you explain a president who is desperate to keep Congress out of any discussion of his negotiations with Iran at the same time that he's asking them to tie his hands, to restrict him in what he does in a war against ISIS?
This is the constant inconsistency of the president. I think that there's a solution here, which is I'm for giving the president absolutely everything that he needs, and that means reaffirming the 2001 authorization to use military force, which the president has been using for the last 6 months. If the president wants to limit himself for the time frame or the geographic area, if he wants to limit himself, fine. But the Congress should say, You should have everything you need, Mr. President, and you have it in the 2001 resolution.
And what about the Democrats who say, no, 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 that's too much?
Well, if they want to try to make that case, let's have them make it to the American people. I don't think it'll go very far.
Julie, for all the talk about limits, and as the president in his security strategy last week talked about, quote, strategic patience, when you see the collapse of Yemen, and when you see what's going on right now in Anbar province in Iraq, where ISIS forces are getting very close to a military base, al-Assad, where there are more than 300 U.S. troops based, and you know the danger to them from that. Is there any second guessing? Is there any rethinking at the White House about the way they're conducting this war?
Well, I think what's tricky for this White House is that they use phrases like strategic patience, long-term commitments, and then you have these situations that are craving, demanding for some kind of immediate action. You talk about Yemen. Yemen is potentially very problematic for the president because he's set up what we're doing in Yemen as the model for what he wants to do with the Islamic State.
In September, he called it a success.
Exactly, and not just in the tactics, but in the idea of a long-term commitment. Well, the U.S. has been launching counterterrorism operations in Yemen since very early in Obama's presidency, and yet now we've seen a collapse in the government. So how can he argue that a long-term commitment is going to result in success when even a long-term commitment may result in a complete upheaval there? So I think that he's trying to set up a model that he really just doesn't have an example for how it will work successfully.
I guess
right
what I'm
now.
asking, though, is do they respond there to changing reality as they see some of this not working?
Slowly. I mean, if you look at what we're doing right now with the Islamic State, it is in response to a changing reality, but it's something that took several years, actually, for the president to do. Ukraine, they're now talking about potentially sending the Ukrainian military defensive weapons. That's something that has been long pushed for in certain parts of this administration, and now finally the White House is considering it. So they do respond, but slowly.
But slowly. Thanks, panel. See you next Sunday.